Hi, Martin. Great. Is it fine?
So maybe a sound check.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Bharat?
Yeah, perfect. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Is audio
I
and
can't
video?
hear you yet.
Yes. Hello, Stefan.
Hello.
I don't hear you, Bharat.
Yeah. Okay, great. Both
Do
audio
you
and
still have your...
yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah.
But Bharat, can we check your microphone, because I can't hear you yet.
Just a moment. Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Hi, welcome, Greg.
No,
Welcome
I
to
can't
you.
hear you yet. Hello, Greg.
Can
Good
you
day,
hear me?
good morning. No, it's evening for you, isn't it?
For Greg, it's evening. Yeah. It's late evening. Yeah. Can you hear me, Martin?
Let's see. I think I see you have your microphone on mute, Greg.
Yeah.
How's that? Is that working now? Is my microphone working now?
Yeah, I can hear you, Greg. I can hear you.
Great. Hello, Stefan. Hello,
Stefan,
Martin.
can you hear everybody?
Hello. Yes,
No?
I can hear everybody.
Yes.
Might just try adjusting this.
Okay. So, Bharat, your microphone seems to work okay?
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Good,
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
And Greg, yours too?
Yeah.
Good.
I know I can hear you. But I'm
Fantastic.
assuming that we'll have our microphones off during the presentations. And do we keep our cameras on, or do you want the cameras off?
Well, let's see. We can choose per session to have all the panelists their cameras on. Their short presentations, so we could do that. That will give a nice filling screen. Otherwise, we'll just have only the speaker, which gives the focus and the floor to the individual speaker. That would make sense too. Yeah. But let's see who enters the screen. So we'll have about 10 more minutes before the meeting will finally start. So you've got a beautiful logo in the background, Greg. That's your institution. Yes.
Yes,
Good.
I've got the camera reversed, so I don't know which way to go to avoid it.
That's great.
Because actually I'm in my study at home and it's Saturday night, so it's complete fraud.
Yes. Is it that late that it's already dark now, or?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's midnight in 2 hours.
Right. So let me introduce Stefan. Stefan and I are kind of doing the work behind the scenes, I guess. And Stefan really is helping me also out with the technicalities, which is much appreciated. It's one of the first times that we're doing this at this scale for the journal. So it's always good to do this in tandem.
I think Bharat is driving us all to new frontiers.
Absolutely. Yes, he's a master in doing that.
Thank you, Greg. Both I and Greg, we know each other for almost any number of years. Almost it goes to almost 2 decades or so. Martin.
About 30 years now.
Yeah, almost.
Wow. Wow. 30 years.
Yeah.
In various locations, or did you actually stay together in the same locations, or that was just at a difference at the various institutes?
We met in London when I was working there and Bharat was coming through.
Yes.
And then he was on the editorial board of a journal that I was editing, and now I'm on the board of a journal that he's editing.
That's called teamwork, isn't it? Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, we have kept close in touch, located in different parts of the world, almost, different parts, that commonality of that interest, scholarly interest, kept us, connected.
Good.
Yeah.
I can see that the first attendees are joining as well, which is good. Welcome to you all. And we'll just wait until it's past 2 o'clock. So most of us will
Hi,
be
Nick.
there.
Yeah, Nick. Good morning to you, Nick.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us, Nick.
Happy to be here.
What time is it for you, Nick?
Well, it's not so bad. It's a little before 8 a.m.
Good.
No, it's all happening now.
Good day, Anna.
Anna. Hello. Yeah. Good morning, Anna.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you join too. Thank you, Anna, for the correspondence that we had in the days just before the meeting and getting everything organized.
Thank you for all your hard work.
And it's a pleasure to be to have you and your center involved. It's much appreciated. Thank you so much. We will just be waiting for most of us to join, so then we can make a nice start just after 2.
Do we have registrants outside of the authors?
Yes, we. I can see in the list we have about some close to 20 people now that have joined us. We had in total just over 200 being registered to attend our webinar, so that's wonderful. And I'll just mention the number as we go beyond the start time of the webinar to show how many actually will join at the beginning of the webinar. So it's really good, and it's a global coverage. So we took effort in trying to promote this webinar and send out various press releases and announcements. So hopefully many can enjoy the talks that you will have later today.
That's great.
Hi. Hello, Nele.
Hello, good to
Hello,
see you
Nele.
all on screen,
Hello.
but still.
Nele, I'm sure I've cited your work in relation to interactions between MEA regimes.
Oh, thank you. Yes. I'm editing a book on interactions in the law of the sea, which is long overdue, but will hopefully go to the publisher very soon.
Interactions between different law of the sea regimes?
Yes, and with other regimes, so law of the sea and human rights, biodiversity, protests at sea. So as one particular part of human rights, climate change law, obviously, and also interactions between law and science with regard to the law of the sea convention. So. Yes, hopefully it's out soon. At the moment, it's I'm delaying the process at the moment, unfortunately.
We've all been there.
When David Freestone comes on, I'm going to hide because I'm well overdue.
It must have been really difficult to find a suitable time for everyone, right? So for me, it's very convenient. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, but I suppose it must be very early, already very, very late for other participants.
Yeah, it has been very very difficult to find that slots, ranging from Nick, in New York to Greg Rose, in Wollongong. It's almost 14-hour time difference.
Yeah.
14-hour time difference.
Okay.
Good day, Nico. Thanks for joining us. And I see also Ola is joined. Great to have you.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah. Hi.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hallo, hier is Nico Schrijver.
Hello.
Nico.
Hi, good to see you.
Great to see you all.
Hi,
Good
Nico.
morning, good night.
Likewise.
Hello, Nico. Yeah, good morning. Yeah.
And I can see Owen is joining us. Good to have you, Owen.
Hi, how are you?
You really have a beautiful background. That is already the poster for the book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So
we try to make a good impression, and we also have a double effort, of course. It's the special issue and the book, both presented. Yeah. So fantastic.
That makes a happy World Environment Day. Huh?
Absolutely. You put that right. And I see that Said has joined us. Thank you so much, Said, for joining us today.
Good day, everybody. I'm very
Hi.
happy.
Hi, morning. Hi, morning.
Hi.
Good to meet you.
So I think we're just waiting for Oliver, Yann, and Edith to join us.
It seems, I think Yann is busy somewhere in some litigation, so his colleague, Lionel Chami will.
Okay. Okay. Lionel will. Okay. Yeah.
Hello to Daya Shankar at the Indian Institute of Technology. Just entered a chat comment.
Let's see. So it's 2 o'clock. Bharat, do you think we should give it a start? And as we talk and speak, some of the others will hopefully join. Or we give it a few minutes. That's also fine with me.
Yeah.
Just give it 1 or 2 more minutes. Good. Well, why don't we give it a start today? And as the others will come in, they will enjoy us speaking with each other. Let me give it a kickstart. Welcome to you all, the contributors, and also to all the participants. We have already over 50 participants at the moment. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all on this beautiful World Environment Day. A warm welcome on behalf of the journal Environmental Policy and Law and the publishing company iOS Press. My name is Martin Stavenga, publisher at iOS Press, and we are so pleased to host this event to celebrate the launch of the special issue and the book Our Earth Matters. with over 20 important contributions and edited by Bharat Desai, who is also now the editor-in-chief of the journal Environmental Policy and Law. And today, with the launch of the special issue and book, it's also a very special day as we celebrate with this launch 50 years of the journal Environmental Policy and Law. And this webinar is about that celebration. We'll start with Bharat saying a few words on the unique special issue and the book publication, and about the contributions by so many special experts who have been involved. Then we'll start with a special session chaired by Edith Brown Weiss, followed by a special session chaired by Nick Robinson, and we will close with conclusions. Some house rules for this webinar I would like to let you know. The meeting will be recorded, so the presentation can be viewed later through the journal's website. If you are a participant and you have any questions during the session, please use the chat function. If you can post your questions, and you'll find the chat option at the bottom of the screen, then my colleague Stefan de Jong and I will monitor that, and we'll try to get all the questions answered during this session. We hope you will have a very interesting and stimulating webinar. And with that said, I will gladly give the words to you, Bharat.
Okay. Well, yeah. Many thanks to you, Martin. Yeah. Greetings to all the friends, colleagues, well-wishers, who have joined today on this auspicious World Environment Day from different parts of the world. My name is Bharat Desai, sitting at India's Jawaharlal Nehru University in the capital of India. Well, it's my great pleasure and privilege to be, as I said, use that word called nimitta, to be the little instrument, or to be the reason, to trigger this process, to join this, I would say, almost an audacious kind of a journey which we have had in last about a year or so, in the midst of unprecedented, the havoc wreaked by COVID-19 pandemic, and the kind of the trauma and the pain which we have witnessed, in almost every part of the world, and this is exactly, maybe a sign of that huge, I would say, a sign of positivity, that where the call given to all the distinguished, contributors, who agreed to provide the thoughts and ideas and their viewpoint, on different aspects of the, as we call it, global environmental problematic. So I'm beholden to each one of the contributors. Initially, for the contributions were sought for the Journal of Environmental Policy and Law. I came on the scene, by being the guest editor, and then the director of the iOS Press was in a very statesman sheep. He invited me to take over as the editor-in-chief, and so my work expanded from being merely a guest editor of the special issue to really to supervise this entire, again, a very unprecedented kind of a transformation of this journal, from one system into another system, a peer-reviewed system, online submissions, so that has been there, almost one full year it has taken, And I must recall, I would say, that the sheer circumstances in which all of us, we have worked together, I know everyone has undergone this process. Some were actually affected by COVID, 19 that infections, and some family members were affected, institutions were paralyzed, and as we could see, the entire academic journey has switched from from the campuses to the online mode, virtual mode. Probably it could be regarded as a blessing in disguise that yes, you could connect with the help of this technology, that in a virtual mode, you could have the, luxury of, seeing the people, whom, far, corners of the world, on the same platform, Such a great, I would say, is a in a sense, a blessing in disguise. Well, it has taken a huge amount of time and energy to piece the things together, in terms of, I would say, it's a basically, I would say, a human effort. I'm not saying it will be a flawless effort, but within the limits of time and space, I made that best effort to bring as much as possible under the same banner, trying to cover as much as possible. Although many of the issues which I desired, they were not possible because many of the people were not, for them it was not possible to work on it and provide it. Some colleagues who really volunteered and promised, they had to back out because of the their own compelling personal circumstances. But we could also have had some others, coming on board subsequently, And so, in a sense, I would say, on the whole, it came out to be very well. As I said, 21 contributions in that special issue, and special issue also, in a sense, grew enormously. So with the, it has been spread over three issues of the journal, volume 56 of 2020 and issues 1 and 2 of 2021. So, and ultimately, again, it was very, I would say, very generous on the part of iOS Press, especially, the director, Einar Fredriksson, and my esteemed friend and colleague, Martin, Stavanger, to work on it, to put the entire iOS team, together, to work, on a very, very, I would say, rigorous schedule to bring out not only the special issues of the journal, but also simultaneously, as I suggested, they actually, walk the talk, to bring out the all the articles into the book form. And so I'm really delighted that the book also took the shape almost alongside as we worked upon these. It has been, I would say, very, very remarkable to work with all the distinguished colleagues, those who have been there, been privy to the global environmental movement, I would say, in last 50 years or so, who have made the enormous contribution so far as the shaping of that, global regulatory process itself is concerned, the twists and turn it took, and the kind of the various institutional actors which really came on the scene. So it's the right time, as I said, multiple level, as my colleague, Martin Stavanger suggested. Well, it's actually the 50th year, not only of the Journal of Environmental, Policy and Law, but also I think if some of the old connoisseurs of international law and international environmental law will recall, it was on 4th of June 1971 when the group of experts had assembled themselves at Fauchald in Switzerland. Just a year prior to the UN Conference on Human Environment. So we are almost on that 50th year of that Phoenix meeting. And I would say it's again, maybe it's a good omen, so to say. And we are also a year away from the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference, which will be celebrated in June 2022. So we are juxtaposed between these two multiple events, dramatic historical events, and I'm aware of the kind of the enormous kind of the potential it holds for the scholars and scholarship, globally, and that really presented us with that opportunity. And in the wake of this, I'm sure, I am beholden to several colleagues, in fact, including Martin was really exuded so much positivity each time, all our parlays, almost weekly parlays, which really, you needed that when you are almost left high and dry, left all alone, work day and night, I must say, without any weekends, thinking about day or night or any time zones, because There was only single-handedly to work on this, making this happen. It was a really audacious task. As I said, it was nothing less than a miracle. And to use David Ben Gurion's words, the Israeli Prime Minister's words, that anyone who does not believe in miracles is not a realist. So this is a kind of indeed a miraculous moment, that you could put this together in a very, very difficult times, very, very difficult times, And some of the colleagues and friends are aware, the place where I sit, I have also myself, gone, my own institution suffered enormously, So it required a huge amount of time, personal courage, personal that resolve, to counter negativity with that huge positivity. I say nothing less than that. I would say God's grace, nature's grace, that one could really overcome this, and try to really come out with something which really for the global benefit, global, trajectory, which really you wanted to really, aim at, And also some other colleagues, and friends, who really provided the backup support, to provide encouragement whenever there was a sign of some kind of a little disappointment or something. I remember my friend, Narinder Sharma, who really stood by me, almost at every single moment, Now, let me try to briefly encapsulate something which has been at the basis of this entire venture. And I thought I'll read out just three brief paragraphs from the preface which I wrote for the journal and the book, and that will probably, I hope it will help us to set the tone, for our webinar today, So what I was, I just read out this 3 paragraph, from that preface, that now we are on the road to the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference in June 2022. It will be yet another defining moment for a futuristic gaze to make sense of the perennial predicament of mankind, to devise effective responses for the world problematic, as it was put by the Club of Rome's report, The Limits to Growth in 1972. In turn, it calls for an honest introspection as regards what have we attained during the last 50 years of journey, comprising the giant regulatory process, use of innovative tools and techniques, art and craft of lawmaking. Has it brought about changes in the human mindsets? How do we jettison the human greed and define our needs? What could be the new ideas, approaches, processes, regulatory tools, and institutional structures to address the world problematic that continues to haunt us even after 50 years? Now it is an appropriate occasion to reflect upon the course traversed in the past 50 years, to earnestly look ahead, to seek answers for our better common environmental future. What lies in store for us in the next 3 quarters of the 21st century? How do we manage our profligate lifestyles, heavy resource extraction-based production processes, and wasteful patterns of consumption, so as not to endanger the survival of life on this planet Earth in general, and the future of the humankind in particular? As I mentioned, that between 1971 Phonex meeting and 1972 Stockholm Conference, a series of scholarly works set the tone that included the Club of Rome's report, The Limits to Growth in 1972, Richard Fox's This Endangered Planet, 1972, and Barbara Ward and René Dubos' Only One Earth, 1972, to name just a few. In the same vein, now after 50 years of lapse, our Earth Matter, this collective scholarly enterprise, which all of us, we put it together, modestly seeks to present the prognosis and prospects prior to the Stockholm Plus 50 event to be held in 2022. And the primary objective of this collective scholarly enterprise is to sensitize the global audience by firing imaginations of the scholars and decision makers, to re-examine the current global approaches so as to explore our future trajectory with new ideas, tools, techniques, processes, new ecological frameworks, and international environmental governance. And this presents a challenge to the connoisseurs of international law and diplomacy, as well as decision makers, to look ahead into the 21st century and beyond for our better common environmental future. And I think it is in this spirit that this collective work we present to the global audience, and I'm sure it will yield enough, I would say, churning to provide us the pathways as we move ahead in the next year toward the Stockholm Plus 50 event in 2022. So I'll stop here, Martin.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Bharat. That's a very stimulating and encouraging outline for us today, and not even just today, but looking ahead the next couple of years. I noticed that also Einar has joined us, Einar Fredriksson. Good day, Einar. Einar is from iOS Press, and he's the publishing director, the owner of the company. Einar, do you want to say a few words, or shall we continue with our program? What would you like to, is there something you would like to add as part of this program?
No, not at this point. I think that it is excellent how it has commenced, and please continue without my interruption now.
Good. We'll just do that. Well, let me just, as a kind of formal moment for say celebrating the launch, I will just hold up. If you can see that, that's maybe reflecting a little bit differently because of the background, but you can't see it, but that's due to the various similar backgrounds. I'm holding the special issue and the book. And I would like to congratulate you all on this magnificent work. Not only is it now in my hands in paper, it's also online. And because of World Environment Day, it's open for everybody to see. So everybody who is actually going to the journal's website will be able to look at all those fantastic contributions and see all the materials. It is a fantastic, beautiful moment to launch this publication, and I think it's also a good moment to start with the very first session. And I would like to welcome Edith for chairing this session, which is titled "Prognosis: Global Environmental Challenges."
Martin, can you just maybe I think it will be pertinent. I think the fitness of things, if we can, if you can, we can request our supporting institutions, if representatives, if they want to say a few words on this launch of the book, and then we can move into the session. So maybe can I request Nick to say a few words, Nick, please.
Well, thank you very much, Bharat, and thank everyone at iOS and the whole group of authors and those who support the authors for the launch of this 50th anniversary edition. I think the founder of the journal Environmental Policy and Law, Dr. Wolfgang Eber-Henne, who many of you know, would be with us today in spirit, because this is his baby. And I think we've all been impressed at the turnaround that Bharat Desai has brought. Bharat's wide vision, his networks of colleagues around the world, which is really a lifetime of relationships, is what makes this issue so special. It does start the new launch of reflections during the era of the Anthropocene. We are no longer in the time setting of 1972, and we need to address the new challenges with new thoughts. So I welcome all the new thoughts in this journal and say thanks to all. I'm sure on behalf of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Dr. Justice Antonio Herman Benjamin, the chairman of the World Commission on Environmental Law, and on behalf of the International Council of Environmental Law, this is a great moment. Thank you very much, Bharat. And thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Now, may I request now Anna Sundström, to say a few words, Anna.
Hey everyone. Well, my name is Anna Sundström, Secretary General of the Olof Palme International Center, and I, on this stage, only would like to, well, first of all, say, of course, how humble and grateful I am to be able to participate and to contribute in this, of course, together with all of the other important contributors. And as well, the head of the Olof Palme International Center, set up to work in the spirit of Olof Palme. Of course, this issue is very close to our heart, and also, as has been mentioned, the pathway now leading up to Stockholm plus 50 is something that we must all fully engaged in to make sure that the change needed really comes around this time, as was also underlined already 50 years ago, the importance and the need for societal changes. I'll come back to this at a later stage in the seminar, but for now, thank you for being able to contribute, and thank you, of course, for setting up this seminar and for all of the hard work that you, Desai, and of course, many others has put in to making this happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Well, now I request friend and colleague Yann Aguila from the Global Pact Alliance to say a few words. Yann, over to you.
Good evening. I'll be replacing Yann here. I'm Lionel Chami, Special Advisor for the Global Pact Coalition. I'd first like to thank you, Bharat. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Einar. Thank you, everyone from the IOS Press. It's a pleasure to be organizing with Bharat and you all this event, and we look forward to a great event and a great 2 sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, now I think we have other distinguished contributors I think present, and I request maybe to say a few words. Edith, can you please say a few words?
It's a great pleasure to be here today, and I first want to congratulate Professor Desai on really an extraordinary achievement and all the work that he has done, and everybody who has gone and contributed to this. And I want to congratulate all the contributors. This is really a very important and remarkable day on World Environment Day because we face a crisis. And it's really a pleasure to be able to chair this opening session. They'll be coming forward and really to be a participant in it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you. Well, Nico, can I request Nico Srijvar?
Yes, hello. Here is the Netherlands, Bharat. And also the IOS Press, my warm congratulations on this major achievement. I very much like the title, only 3 words, and each of them I feel very attached to. Our Earth Matters. And it is a fantastic effort you achieved. And I'm afraid I also put your patience to quite a test. But you always have been so gentle and calm, and I'm sure that is reflected in the contents of the book.
Okay. Ole Christian, Ole?
Yes, thank you, Bharat. I'm very, very happy to be here and part of this very distinguished group of scholars trying to make headway on all the environmental problems that we see today. And it is the kind of stamina and the resilience that you have been showing in carrying on this project that we all need to learn from. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ole. Yeah. Is there any other contributor who is present? I'm not able to see on the screen, but maybe in that case, we can come back to that. Over to you, Martin. We can move into the sessions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bharat, and thank you for leading us this way. I don't think I have anything else to add, and just
Martin, Greg is there. Maybe Greg, would you play? Would you say a few words? Greg Rose, Greg. Sorry.
Hello from down under in Australia, and I look forward very much to our discussions this evening. I won't hold us up any further. It's a pleasure to meet those of you that I haven't met before, and to say hi again to those I do.
Okay. Well, if we continue the line, maybe in my screen I also see Nele. Would you like to say a few words?
Nele, yeah.
Yes, but thank you so much. But I think almost everything has been said before. Congratulations to this really fantastic compilation of articles. I was delighted to see it grow from the first idea to a really impressive volume. I'm really thankful to be part of this distinguished group, and I can only say that I co-authored my piece with a research associate from my institute, and I asked her whether she wanted to do the piece together with me because I knew I would need some research assistance from her. And then she read the list of contributors and she got so humbled. She said, oh, are you sure I can do this? And I was like, yes, absolutely. But just to see all these names of people she has been and I have been reading from and working with was really an experience. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Nele. Well, maybe may I request Syed Mahmoudi? Syed, would you please say a few words, Syed?
Syed, you're still muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Okay. I would also like to join the others in congratulating you for making this meeting possible today. I'm particularly honored to be together with so many old friends and thankful to Nick Robinson for mentioning Wolfgang Burhenne, the founder of this journal. I think it is really important to name him today. I know how much important it was for him to have this journal and his insistence that this is a journal for decision makers. And it's not only a normal journal. And I think it has always been and has really taken a position among all publications on environmental law and policy that is unique. And I'm very happy that it's now in very good hands. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Syed. And well, both I think in as a sequel to what my esteemed senior colleagues, Nick and Syed had mentioned. Well, of course, there is a full dedication, to Wolfgang, in the preface to the journal which I wrote, spelled out. I think this was almost around the time when Wolfgang was, talking about this transition thing, and I recall that my last in-person meeting with him in the lobby of the Hotel Maritime in Bonn in July 2016, and well, all of us, we have learned, and that is why I said it was to step into the shoes of the giant shoes of Wolfgang. It is of course a huge challenging task. It's a pleasure, and it's a huge privilege, and I've sat with him, often when, editing some of the articles, as I said, the kind of the zest which he will show. So we'll, all of us, and that is why I thought, it's a collective effort that we'll try to do best what Syed mentioned, the journal for decision makers. So we are gradually, we'll make the best honest efforts to transition into that mold, to provide it as a platform for the best scholarship in the world, to so to say, to bring all together. And as we charter the new course, I think toward the Stockholm plus 50 2022, the road to Stockholm plus 50 at 2022, that special section which I have already launched, and I really request and call upon all the friends and colleagues in different parts of the world to come forward to contribute that, because it's just a year away from the 2022, and that will be another kind of a defining moment, and I hope we will try to produce something together, maybe a year hence. Thank you, sir. Yes, over to Martin.
Yes, I still see some more names on the screen. Perhaps Oliver, you would like to say a few words?
Thank you, Martin. It's a pleasure, Bharat, and I'm humbled. We have met in many parts of the world, and now we meet on this screen, and you have performed a wonderful piece of work. It's an old African saying that standing on the shoulders of giants, one can see far. And I think that's where we're standing 50 years ahead. And I will be very interested in where this road is heading towards Stockholm next year. and towards the 50 years thereafter, because we still have a lot to do. In that sense, I would like to congratulate all the colleagues here, and particularly you, Bharat, for this remarkable piece of work.
Thank you, Oliver. Well, I think almost I'm not able to see on the screen, any other a contributor, who's present, but I would love to invite him, to join. But I thought, let me, before I wind up this,
maybe Bharat, I still see Owen on my screen. Perhaps Owen, you would like to say a few words?
Okay, yeah. My screen doesn't show. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. Sorry,
yeah.
I think everything has been said.
Okay. Great.
Just again, it's a great honor to be included in this group of contributors. I'm really delighted to have been included. It's a great pleasure to see so many old friends and to meet some new faces. I don't know whether to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, because we have people from all over the world here, so I can only say hello. What I would say is that I would like to thank Professor Desai for his great patience and great grace in putting together a really, really, really nice publication or group of publications. And to say that this important journal, Environmental Policy and Law, is clearly in very, very good hands and has a great future. And I think we'll all look forward to contributing to it in the future. So thank you very much.
Well, yeah, thank you. Let me pick up something what Oliver rightly mentioned. Well, I think this is actually an honest effort to be on the standing on the shoulders of our predecessors. The scholarship, as I said, both the scholarship and editorship, always grows on the shoulders of contributions made by the previous people. And so we are beholden to somebody who had already laid the path for you, for instance. And like as we close this session, let me recall the very futuristic words of the late Indian Prime Minister, and a very statesman, Atal Bihari Vajpayee. I recall his days, that you need the large heart and the large mind to be great, and these are the difficult times when we need the great ideas, And I recall there was a video, I have not seen yet the original video, but what he was trying to say was, well, the human progress, that we have reached to the moon, we have reached to the celestial bodies, we have gone to the bottom of this planet Earth, everywhere we have tried to have had the footprint, but we have yet to learn how to live on this planet Earth, which is that beautiful planet, that is exactly the predicament which all of us were facing, and that this critical juncture, I think it's the ideas that will matter, those trajectories, which we need to really think aloud and ahead, to find some avenues, so that the business as usual scenario does not remain. And I'm sure, as we say, what the Club of Rome report said, there are limits to growth, but there are no limits to human progress, human thinking, human effort, and human positivity. And I would say that this entire effort is, in that same vein, and so we only hope and pray, and we will make the best honest effort, moving forward. Yes, Martin, please.
Good. Well, excellent. I think we had everybody say a few words. If we missed anybody, please speak. And I think we can continue with the great next session, which would be probably Edith for maybe another, say, 50 minutes or so, or a small hour. So we allow for a short break after that. Is that about right for you?
I will adapt to what the needs what the needs are. We will adapt the panel.
Good. Okay. Well, with that, I'll happily give the word to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be chairing this first panel, where we're going to explore the prognosis for international environmental law. We have 5 distinguished participants today and a 6th who at the last minute could not be here. Each of them will give brief summaries of their chapters and their presentations to allow some time for discussion both among ourselves and with the audience on questions that we may have. The first presentation I'm going to start with is the person who could not be here. And that is Professor Louis Kotzé and his collaborator Rakum Kim, who could not join us today. But their paper exploring the analytical, normative, and transformative dimensions of Earth systems law provides, I think, a really important dimension to this whole debate that we're going to have today. So in consultation with him, I agreed to take on the task of very briefly summarizing the important parts of his paper, and any errors are my responsibility as I do this. But I think it's a very important contribution that broadens our consideration of the issues. Professor Kotzé and Dr. Kim explore Earth as a complex Earth system with a need for a complex governance system. And what they argue is that we are now encroaching on the limits of the Earth system. And they point out that international environmental law as we know it has not been nearly ambitious enough to prevent really human intervention from having potentially dire consequences for the Earth system. They argue that there is a need for a radical transformation, for planetary integrity, and for social ecological justice. That we essentially need a new legal paradigm, which they call the Earth Law paradigm. They argue that the present system consists of lots of disparate, very fragmented pieces of international law and national law. They take issue with such things as the Sustainable Development Goals, as really having facilitated human interventions in the environment that are not necessarily useful for the integrity and may benefit those who are able to do the interventions and not all people equally who are affected by these interventions. And they take on other aspects of what we traditionally know as environmental law. They say that everyone needs to be involved in international environmental law. Then they propose a new Earth system law, which has several linkages there that I want to flag. One is a much closer link with the natural sciences, and I assume that they would include there the social sciences. That there needs to be a link with the present and the future, and they would foresee a much closer link with nature, which may tie into some of the litigation that we've seen on the rights of nature and certainly of the natural system. They also look at the possibility of having new norms. And there are really three things in their paper, three elements of Earth systems that they propose here. One is what they call the analytical dimension of the Earth systems. And then the second one is a normative dimension. And there's one paragraph that I want to quote to you because I think it sets an important tone for what they are arguing, which is that planetary justice considerations depart from the acknowledgement that there will be winners and losers in the Anthropocene. The role of Earth system law, and indeed Earth system governance more broadly, is then to provide a normative framework for prioritizing the needs and interests of the marginalized and vulnerable within a paradigm of planetary stewardship. And then they go on to talk about a transformative nature for international environmental law. And I wanted to share this with you today because I think it broadens the framework and challenges us to ask, what do we need in the age of the Anthropocene? And I'm sure that were they here, they would be glad to respond to questions to you. With that, I would like to move on to our second presentation, which is Nicholas Robinson, whom I think needs no introduction, but I will give him an introduction anyway. He is the university professor on the environment and the Gilbert and Sarah Curlin Distinguished Professor of Environmental Law Emeritus at Pace University School of Law and the executive governor of the International Council on Environmental Law, and of course has been very active over many years and made a very big difference in these areas. His paper is called Making Environmental Law Function in the Anthropocene. And with that, could I turn it over to you, Nick, to give a very brief summary for us?
Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, for Louis Klotz's paper summary, and for chairing our panel today. I'll be very brief because we all have only a few moments, and I want to follow Edith's injunction not to run over my time. I was privileged as a young lawyer to participate in the 1972 Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, where the international community added environmental conservation, environmental stewardship to its list of global tasks. It had been missing from the Charter of the UN, and there were scientists in 1945 who took note of that. And they called in a meeting about 2 years after the UN was beginning to meet out on Long Island and Lake Success in New York. They called for a new international organization to work on these issues. That finally came about in 1948 with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And it was out of that that our work on environmental law with Wolfgang Berheni and this journal emerged. So we're not there yet. There's a debate going on in the General Assembly right now under UN Resolution 73/333 about what we will do if we have a Stockholm conference in 2022, whether we should have a political declaration at the UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi in February of 2022. And probably the General Assembly will issue a modalities resolution sometime in August or perhaps even into the new session in September, if negotiations continue so slowly, about what our message must be. But clearly the message that everyone in this journal and all of us have is that environmental law has not been successful yet. It's necessary. We know it's a necessary set of tools, but it's insufficient to meet the challenges of our degrading global environment. So necessary, but not sufficient. And in February, a report, a scientific synthesis report was released to the UN Environment Program called Making Peace with Nature. Secretary General Guterres said the alarm bells will go off in this report. It's not just climate change, it's biodiversity loss, and they also list the third global crisis of chemical contamination and pollution. The top edge of that cutting third crisis people are angst about now is with plastics, but it's much deeper than that. We are, as Guterres said, threatening human civilization with our own human actions. Back in 1972, when we first were beginning to work on these issues globally, Dr. René Dubos, who wrote a book with Barbara Ward, the economist for that conference, popularized the idea that we should think globally and act locally. So one of the key factors of environmental stewardship is to understand the global problematique, to understand what we're doing to the biosphere, but then do what we can within the areas of our jurisdictions, of our personal lives, of our institutional work, to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. René Dubos is apt today because he was the discoverer of antibiotics. He's a great microbiologist, and in an age of COVID-19, his life's work is very important to us. He wrote a book in 1959 called The Mirage of Health, in which he said, modern man believes that he has achieved almost complete mastery over the natural forces which molded his evolution in the past, and that he can now control his own biological and cultural destiny. But this may be an illusion. Like all other living things, he is part of an immensely complex ecological system and is bound to all its components by innumerable links. Human destiny is bound to remain a gamble because at some unpredictable time and in some unforeseeable manner, nature will strike back. Well, nature did strike back with COVID-19 and the phenomenon of zoonosis, in which viruses and bacteria spill out of a stable relationship with other host species, other host mammals, and come to infect humans as the next host for their lives. And this has given rise to many calls for a more holistic approach to handling our environmental challenge. I would add to what is in my paper, the debate right now over One Health. It's clear that animal and human health are exchange diseases and are closely interrelated. But it's not just the need for medical doctors and veterinarians to work together. They must also work with the wildlife biologists and the conservation biologists who keep nature healthy in the wild. And the wild can be in our own backyard. As we know, these are not distant relationships, they're all around us. So we need a more holistic approach to One Health than just having the two medical sectors cooperate. And one definition to One Health is the following. This was endorsed in 2017 by the UN Environment Assembly when it met in Nairobi. One Health is the universal policy and practice of care for the integrity, stability, resilience, and beauty of Earth's biotic community through nurturing the interdependent health links that are shared among humans, wildlife, domesticated animals, plants, and ecosystems, and all nature. One Health transcends and unites the contributions of the life sciences for stewardship of ecosystem integrity and biodiversity and the well-being of life on Earth. We need to basically make not just environmental law more effective and available everywhere, but we're going to have to rally environmental law in a more holistic and integrated way. We need to mainstream environmental decision-making to be at the core of all government decision-making and not at the periphery. And I think we have to be humble enough to recognize that since 1972, we've proven a new model, but it has not been adopted in an effective way. We have to be humble enough to realize that we have to holistically move our field of stewardship of the biosphere into being the prime function of international cooperation and government and not a peripheral one. So with those brief remarks, Edith, I'll pass the floor back to you and look forward to everyone else's contributions. I especially want to hear Nele Matz-Lück on interrelationships, as I think One Health is all about interrelationships. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. And now I would like to turn to Professor Nele Matz-Lück and her collaborator, Leif Christensen, and Professor Matz-Lück will be presenting today on their chapter, The United Nations General Assembly as the Anchor, a global environmental conferencing. And we're very much looking forward to hearing your remarks, Nele.
Thank you so much, Edith. And a small disclaimer, sorry, Nicholas, as well, if I will be disappointing you because the topic was not interrelations really, but the role of the UN General Assembly as an anchor. And I'm slightly relieved that I'll be speaking in the first session and not in the session where the road to Stockholm +50 process is elaborated upon, because I would love to say fully optimistically that this conference, this event will really bring international environmental law further. But from our analysis of environmental conferencing in the context of the General Assembly, I'm a bit more skeptical, but I don't want to spoil anyone's enthusiasm. And maybe I have some, or we have some ideas towards the end of our article, how such conferences can contribute to a way forward. I think there's no doubt that the UN General Assembly had an important role to play, and these conferences in 1972 and in 1992, the Rio Earth Summit, continue to be highly relevant. So I realized that in my lectures on international environmental law to my students, these are the two events I mentioned. These are the declarations that we read, where we analyze how have parts of these declarations actually developed into customary international law. So this idea of an anchor, which we explore a bit more in the paper, is really important here. An anchor can be two things. It can be something that is stable, that is a stable basis for development. And this is where the General Assembly, with the first big environmental conferences, I think really might a contribution and continues to be a stable forum, something that can be used, that can be built upon. But an anchor can also be something that holds development back, right? It can be an obstacle. Maybe we want to move forward, but there's this anchor holding us back. And if we look at the contribution, maybe not of the first two conferences, but of later contributions to international environmental law, one may be a bit more skeptical whether this has really innovatively brought international environmental law forward. So in my personal perspective and from the analysis we have done, what the outcomes of these conferences were, I think the time for formal lawmaking and institution building in international environmental governance is over. Not completely over. We have the BBNJ process, but it is rather an exception. We had big movements in the 1970s, in the 1990s that can be tied more or less loosely to the international environmental conferences under the roof of the UN General Assembly. But today, the challenges that we have today is much less a lack of law or a lack of institutions. It's a lack of implementation. And I don't think that these big environmental conferences as such will make a difference for implementation. Because we already, of course, there are scientific developments which are extremely important to keep track of, no doubt about that. But we already know where the problems are. We know what pollution contributes to the environmental disasters that we have. Yes, maybe there new issues come up, like floating plastic patches on the ocean, but that we contribute to pollute the environment, that we contribute to climate change, that we contribute to dramatically change the oceans and the whole Earth system. We know that. And we know what instruments we have. We have institutions, we have law, we have treaties, but in the end, states need to implement. And so while I'm sure that the General Assembly as a forum for discussion is important, and that environmental conferences as such are important, I think there should be a shift in emphasis to implementation, not to yet another declaration or agenda or plan of action, but really more specifically to implementation. And one thing we have in our analysis have taken from the past is stakeholder involvement. And I think that is really a key forward. Maybe we need to move away from the states who could implement but are reluctant to do for several reasons. Maybe it's really time to even have more stakeholder involvement. We've seen this development in the big environmental conferences. Also, the Ocean Conference under the roof of the UN has much more emphasized these voluntary contributions, these commitments from our NGOs, from civil society. And I think there is a great chance in that. So I don't want to say there shouldn't be a conference in Stockholm plus 50, but I think in the planning, it should be very clear what these conferences can actually achieve, and maybe a slight shift in emphasis. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for those comments. And I should inform all of you that Professor Matz-Lück is the co-director of the Walter Schücking Institute for International Law at Kiel University and a professor of public international law there at Kiel University. Thank you very much for those provocative comments. And with that, I would like to move on, having set a provocative stage, to discuss the next presentation, which will be by Yann, Aguila, and Lionel Chami, a new environmental charter for the future. And presenting today will be Lionel Chami. And Lionel, may I ask you to proceed?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor. I'd first like to thank Professor Robinson for his wonderful presentation of the need for a One Health approach, as well as Professor Matz-Lück for I think, a really good metaphor about the UN General Assembly as an anchor, both something that's stable, but, keeps us in the past. I'd like to add, if I may, what Antonio Gramsci said about adding to the pessimism of reason, the optimism of will. And perhaps I'll try to be more optimistic in our presentation, and optimism being the key line of our paper with Yann. So our paper is entitled A New Environmental Charter for the Future. So we're very forward-looking. We start in 1945 with, the hope that, that rose then for a rules-based international order. Yet since then, two mutually interdependent problems have arisen. First, international order fell into disrepair, and the waves of hope for international order based on the rule of law crashed against the rocks of state-centric realpolitik. Secondly, the environmental question, which was largely ignored by the post-war consensus, is now at the heart of the world's considerations. A new environmental charter for the future would take aim at these two problems as follows. First, the environmental question can serve as cement for a divided world. The 1972 Stockholm Conference, which Nicholas Robinson brilliantly referred to and was present in, was held at the height of the Cold War. It's a case in point for the potential for the environment to be a common, binder between states. Secondly, the current state of international environmental law is inadequately armed to tackle the current crisis. The 2018 report of the UN Secretary General on gaps in international environmental law underlies that argument. We know also that the dire provisions of climate scientists reveal that we're far from doing enough. In response, we argue that a fundamental charter that would recognize the fundamental principles of international environmental law is needed for three reasons. First, we argue that principles have undeniable merits, both in a legal and in a political system. Secondly, we point that international environmental law is built around a purely technical vision that gives little place to principles. Ultimately, we make the case for a global environmental charter that would enshrine fundamental principles and rejuvenate the values that founded the international system. Let's move on to the first part. We start with a point of view that the history of nations and polities in general is punctuated by foundational constitutional moments. And the spirit of these defining moments comes to be enshrined in texts that would come to embody the fundamental values and narratives of society. This is the sort of text that resembles the American Declaration of Independence or the French Universal Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Phrases like, we believe that all men are created equal, that they're endowed with certain unalienable rights, still resonate today as the creed of specific nations. So we believe that principles really do have this sort of storytelling function that is necessary in the world of environment today. We also argue from the perspective of law that general principles can be normative, and we give the examples of judicial review as is done by Supreme Courts and also by the European Court of Human Rights. Now, to move on to the part that concerns really our topic today, which is international environmental law, we argue and we point to the fact that international environmental law as this is built around sectorial treaties in a piecemeal fashion to provide punctual and technical responses to clearly delimited issues. We have one treaty for climate, another for wetlands, a third one for desertification, etc. Overall, we have more than 500 multilateral environmental agreements that coexist. And so there's two reasons why we need principles there. First, at the level of treaty making, we say that it's harder to agree on the details if we don't agree on the principles first. And B, at the level of implementation, a commitment to a technical agreement would be strengthened if it stands on a solid ground of commonly agreed upon principles. Moving on to the third part of our demonstration, why we need a new environmental charter for the future. Unfortunately, the values we're talking about, the ones that will enshrine in great texts of national law and international law, were forged in the cradle of catastrophes. The post-World War II era witnessed the blooming of international law for this reason. We argue, given the scale, gravity, and transnational character of the global environmental crisis, that a wave of similar intensity would be direly needed today. The ecological crisis offers an opportunity to reforge the international order around the question of the environment. And the seeds for such a revival are already laid. The 1972 Stockholm Conference and Declaration, the 1992 Rio Declaration, as well as some sectoral agreements such as the Paris Agreement, do enshrine a limited range of principles. These, however, are either non-binding or sectorial, and there are very few principles that are both universal and binding in international environmental law. So the type of charter that we believe could, be an adequate tool to tackle this problem could do four things. One, it could fill the gaps that were revealed by the 2018 Secretary General report. Secondly, it could recognize enforceable environmental rights for citizens in the same vein as the 1998 Aarhus Convention or the 2018 more recent Escazú Agreement. It could also demand, thirdly, ambitious action from states and private actors. And four, it could raise the threshold for environmental protection worldwide, thus contributing to a level playing field for private actors in a globalized economy. When I say this, I do realize that this sounds like a very optimistic dream, and that perhaps it could be true that the era of international lawmaking at the UN has indeed ended, as Professor Matz-Lück said. But we argue that there's also room for hope, and that we never know what could happen. The Copenhagen summit was hailed as a catastrophic failure, as states initially couldn't agree on a binding treaty on the climate. But 6 years later, the Paris Agreement was adopted, and that was hailed as a success. So we do hope that for 2022, in the commemoration of the Stockholm Conference and the UNEP at 50 conference, we certainly hope that such an environmental charter could at least be, if not adopted, this seems very distant, at least referred to and talked about. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. And I should add that you are a special advisor to the Global Pact for the Global Pact Coalition in Paris, France. And we thank you for all your work on that. I would now like to turn to Nico Schrijver, who is a professor emeritus of public international law at the Grotius Center for International Legal Studies at Leiden University in the Netherlands. And he's a state counselor for the Council of State in the Netherlands, and has also worked in this area for a very, very long time. And will speak to us on state sovereignty and the planetary management of natural resources. And I want to welcome you here today, Nico.
Thank you very much, Edith. It's such a pleasure to join all of you today. And I have listened with great interest so far, and I really have to restrain myself in not raising questions immediately to the previous speakers, but maybe we have an opportunity to do so later. Well, as you kindly indicated, my paper is indeed on the role of the state. Very often, we view the sovereign state and the principle of sovereignty as major stumbling blocks for effective environmental conservation and sustainable development. And some colleagues even predict the demise of the idea of the sovereign state. However, I think reality has it differently. Sovereignty, you posed the question to us, Madam Chair, what has changed since the early 70s? Well, sovereignty is no longer an unqualified concept. Basically, from Stockholm 1972 on, manifold new duties have been imposed upon the sovereign state as a result of the progressive development of international law. Much of the international law movement vests states with the responsibility to adopt all kinds of regulations, to monitor and secure compliance, to exercise justice in order to achieve its implementation. Whereas we have to admit, supranational global environmental governance has remained notoriously weak despite the heroic efforts of UNEP or the IMO or the WHO and what have you. Well, in order to test my proposition, I examined in my paper 3 landmark multilateral treaties, namely the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention, of course also the Convention on the Conservation of Biological Diversity, Rio 1992, and the recent Paris Agreement on Climate Change. And basically, the review based upon an analysis of the provisions of these 3 treaties demonstrate that sovereignty serves as a key organizational principle for the realization of global values, including environmental conservation and sustainable development. At the same time, they also function as a concrete regulatory framework for action. And in general terms, whether we like it or not, our planet is still divided in 200 sovereign territorial units, mostly along irrational borders. But it is a fact of life that these 200-odd national states exist, despite the myriad of challenges to the role of national sovereignty in a global society. Well, at regular intervals, we hear people sounding the death knell for the principle of sovereignty and predict, if not herald, the withering away of the sovereign state. But each time, this proves to be premature. In reality, the sovereign state still functions as the prime layer of global governance. And indeed, when you review the 3 treaties I mentioned, then you note that they are of great significance for environmental conservation and sustainable use of natural resources. And each of them, in their own way, functions as a framework treaty, and they have been elaborated in subsequent treaties, international arrangements, and also in national implementation legislation. Furthermore, all 3 treaties provide procedures for international consultation and cooperation. And they have a similar governance structure with a conference of the parties as the main decision-making organ, a treaty secretariat, and various subsidiary bodies, including advisory bodies and compliance committees. Basically, only UNCLOS has a more advanced international institutional structure with the International Seabed Authority and the Enterprise as operational agencies, and of course the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea as the judicial wing. And all these 3 treaties reflect the emergence of new principles of international law relating to environment and development, and contribute to the consolidation and the progressive development of these principles, such as the principle of sustainable development, most notably the duty of states to achieve sustainable use of natural resources, due care, harm prevention, the precautionary approach to natural resources, ecosystems, and biological diversity. Of course, the principle of equity, thinking about your fantastic monumental book, Edith, common heritage of humankind, common concern of humankind, the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, the principle of public participation, transparency, access to information, and very important, the principle of integration and interrelationship. Indeed, all kinds of principles you would like to include in some environmental charter on which Lionel spoke so well a moment ago. But all these three multilateral treaties under review undeniably demonstrate the continued key role of sovereign states which they have to play in today's world. While many provisions of especially the Biodiversity Convention and the climate treaties may not be directly enforceable, they all carry important normative authority. In the words of our colleague Daniel Bodansky, with respect to the Paris Agreement, such treaties create, I quote, normative expectations, in the sense that the agreements represent a progression beyond previous policies and signal the highest possible ambition, reflecting common but differentiated responsibilities in the light of different national circumstances. Well, upon reflection, they also signify that in contemporary international relations, sovereignty serves increasingly as an organizational principle for the realization of certain global values, such as those embodied in the treaties under review, including the intrinsic value of nature, environmental conservation, respect for human and people's rights, intra- and intergenerational equity, peace and security. Therefore, my proposition, in modern international law, sovereignty functions therefore not merely as the basis of rights, but also very much as the source of responsibility, accountability, and liability as the basis of international cooperation. Moreover, these treaties also provide a very concrete regulatory framework for action states have to take at a national level. So modern international law really defines the substance of the responsibilities of the sovereign state internationally as well as nationally. And therefore, sovereignty is not just a stumbling block or an absolute or static concept, but rather it is relative and a dynamic one, vesting states with a host of duties as well as rights. Therefore, in a globalizing international community with an increasing set of shared global values, such a modern understanding of sovereignty can well underpin rather than block the evolution towards sustainability, environmental justice, and human dignity. Hence my conclusion, the process towards achieving such objectives, in that process, the role of responsible states is indispensable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments there, Nico. I think so far we have seen a broad range of views on the prognosis of international environmental law. And now I would like to call upon Bharat Desai, who we all know, but he is a professor of international law at the Jawaharlal Nehru Chair in International Environmental Law and chairman for the Center for the International Legal Studies at the University in New Delhi. Can you sort of end this session, the formal presentations, not the end of the session, by summarizing your paper on international environmental lawmaking? And then I have a question I want to put to all the panelists, and I do want to have some time for a brief time for discussion here. Bharat?
Yeah. Thank you, Edith, for this generous introduction, and thank you very much. I thought, with the help of all previous presentations which are made, that had made my task a little easier to spell out, what I wanted to put under scanner, on trying to do the prognosis of this entire international environmental lawmaking process, which we have witnessed in last 5 decades or so. I think I would say, if we can take the 1972 Stockholm Conference as the little starting point also. Now five concrete question what Nico felt like asking. I thought I'll start with, and then each of them I'll just try to spell out. One, that we have hitherto followed a very large kind of a giant centralized lawmaking process. Has it worked? Does centralization work? Secondly, what is the role of the UN General Assembly? Nele has already mentioned about that. I'm really great fan of the role played by the United Nations General Assembly. So what kind of a role, what I call as a role of a conductor, as a conductor of a giant orchestra, did the UN General Assembly, in a sense, reasonably succeed in conducting the show, hitherto? Thirdly, where does the entire giant multilateral environmental regulatory technique heading for? There are agreements and agreements, as there are different versions of ranging from 300 to 500 agreements, multilateral agreements, which have proliferated. So has it really worked in that sense? Of where does it head? Fourthly, are there any limits to the law? That is exactly the predicament or the issue which we need to probably little give a thought to it. That are there any limit to the law? And finally, what Nico himself spelled out, the issue of sovereignty, because the entire system revolves around the state-centric sovereignty, for instance. Then how do we tame the sovereignty of the state, to move forward? Now, quickly move, to pick up the first issue. Centralization has always been a challenge anywhere within the national societies. Also, we have been facing this issue in much larger democratic societies, that centralization versus decentralization. Can you really earmark power to the other constituent units so that the ultimately implementation is going to be made at that grassroots level, local level, for instance? So does that centralization work? Or to put in other words, this entire hypothesis that there are problems which are global in nature and they need global solutions. So does that largely that globalization of the problems, where the action is to be done at the local level, does it really help? Very our diagnosis of the nature of the problem themselves, that does it really help? Because as we can see, the very issue of climate change has now turned a full circle, ranging from the global nature of the instrument which we had. Now the entire action has come back to haunt us at the national level, where multiple litigations have now been taken up at the domestic level only, saying that the states are not doing something at the global level. Now let us do something at the local level, for instance. So the centralization, more and more treaty making, has been taking place, and that has put probably enormous, probably burden, on the negotiator. Especially, I would say, it's not much of a problem in United States, in Americas and Europe, but I think I would say in most of these, I would say in Asia, Africa, Latin America, the former colonial systems, where the bureaucracy still rules. It's a stranglehold of bureaucracy, really. And I've being part of the official Indian delegation for many years, I know it firsthand, that how the bureaucracy prevails, does not let any, for them it's a joyride. For them, many bureaucrats have made careers out of it. They don't let the scholarly institutions to inject with the ideas, because ultimately it's a battle of ideas. You need those ideas, and those ideas need to have a literally, make their effect, and probably in terms of participation at the centralized level, probably it has created a distance, that you are not much concerned about that instrument which you went, or a lot of people were saying that, well, we signed and sealed the agreement. How does it make a difference? How does it affect our sovereignty? There is a lot of confusion among a lot of people. Second important role is that of the General Assembly. And as all of us, we know, right from the decade of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, the only democratic organ in the UN system, as we know, where to one state, one vote principle, the General Assembly had led from the front, right from the whole debate of decolonization to friendly relations to population issue, women's issue, environmental issue, human rights issue. It's the General Assembly which has been at the vanguard, Although there are limits, we know it very well, that General Assembly's resolutions are not having, per se, they are recommendatory in nature. But then the next question often which we ask in the field of international law, how binding are those recommendations? Where do those recommendations are taken seriously, for instance? And amazingly, as we saw, it has led to huge churning, where the General Assembly has put in place, and what Lionel has just mentioned about this new dramatic kind of action, it's a French-led initiative, on the global fact for the environment, resolution 73/333, which has now again led the, so General Assembly as a political master, in the UN system has been able to, chart out that course. Yeah. And thirdly, the multilateral environmental regulatory technique, that there are agreements and agreements to treaty or not to treaty has been again a very kind of a dilemma situation, and plenty of the people who there is a penchant to treaty making, and are there any limits to treaty making, do you really sign and seal the treaty merely to be forgotten? Large number of the treaties, which are just remain on paper, and how much do you regulate? How much do you do the treaty making, for instance, like a convention, umbrella convention like CMS, Convention on Migratory Species of Wild Animal. How many instruments do you have so far as the CMS is concerned? All the species that you have listed, that do you have each species? And I remember my fabulous discussions both with Francois Burhani and with Wolfgang Burhani, because they were one of the earlier pioneers of the for the crafting of the CMS itself. They said, yes, that thought has to be given. That do you need, how many 100 agreements do you need under the CMS? Yeah, anything you want to say, Edith?
Yes, it's just that I know you will be shortly summarizing and ending, because I want to make sure we have time for a question or two. So thank you very much for your consideration on this.
Yeah, and finally, I think, so we in a sense, since we talk about and there are plenty of issues of the agreements which are taking place. I have already had a full book, Cambridge, which has published in 2010, that there are issues of synergies, coordination, and location of the secretariats of the conventions, and as I noticed, as there are human egos, there are institutional egos, which come in the way of proper calibration of many of these agreements, location, the legal status of the secretariat. These are some of the issues which we have not yet fully addressed, and that brings me to the final two aspects. One is, are there any limits to the lawmaking? That do we move into a new era, like many of the colleagues have spoken about the earth system governance, ecological framework. Edith herself has suggested for that kind of a planetary trust kind of a threshold, or that criteria which we need to. So we need to probably innovate new approaches to so-called lawmaking, And finally, that are there any kind of how do we tame the sovereignty of the state, sovereignty within the law, as C. Wilfred Jenks had very famously written in monograph, the sovereignty not beyond the law, within the law. And the question is, can you, like what the European Union, the German Constitutional Court had said was, that it's a kind of the coexistence, that there are sovereignty, you share sovereignties in common, Can we usher into that era where we can tame that sovereignty, the beast of sovereignty, so that we can move ahead so far as this entire, question of, existence of the humankind and the survival of the planet Earth could be appropriately addressed. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and your many insights that you've offered. And now there's only a small amount of time for discussion, but I did want to put a question to at least several of the panelists quickly, and then to observe the request that there be a break between the two sessions, because I know how all of us react to Zoom all over the world. And that is, since 1972, we've seen enormous advances in our scientific understanding of how the Earth system works. And we've also had an opportunity to become familiar with the limits and the possibilities of what governments do, what non-governmental organizations can do, what the private sector can do. And so but now we really need a change in human behavior. And so my question to you is, if you had to sort of give a 1 or 2 line, or maybe 3 line response, how do we get the changes in human behavior, and what role does law play on that? And I'd like for just very brief interventions to start with Nele, and then Lionel and Nico, and if we have time, Nick and Bharat. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear the last part properly. I think that's very that's clear. We have seen so many advancement. We have seen so many changes, and the question is really, how can we keep track, and who is supposed to keep track of all these environments and developments, and how can we transform them into governance mechanisms? And I think it's not only the science, and I try to indicate that a bit when I emphasize stakeholder involvement. I think it's not only the science and the knowledge and the understanding that has evolved, but also our understanding and idea of governance. And Liam, I have all great sympathy for an environmental charter, and I've been thinking most of my academic life, I've thinking into the same direction. I thought we need more treaties, we need a charter, we need principles. And maybe that's something that is important to it is important as a governance mechanism, but I don't think it is the only way, and it's the only kind of institution. I think we have to think into way more different directions how we can govern the process of saving the planet. I mean, the theme of today's talk, Our Earth Matters. I mean, that's really the core of all our efforts. And so I think it's maybe these environmental conferences continue to be a platform, but we have to be more creative, I think, in light of our environmental governance, and we need to involve the states, we need to involve the institutions we have, but also other actors. And maybe it's really more bottom up, it's more NGOs, it's more little projects, and not the effort to find the one tool, the one institution, the one treaty that is going to save the planet, because I don't think we are going to find that. As much sympathy as I have for an environmental charter or a global environmental treaty. And institution and court, of course.
Thank you. I want to have just a few very brief remarks now, because we are shortly running out of time here. But Lionel, on simply the question of how do we change human behavior, and Nico, how do we change human behavior? Because that's really what we're talking about at this point. We've seen the limits. Do you have any, and you may or may not have anything to add, because then I want to see whether Nick or Bharat has anything to add. Lionel, Nico has something to add. I'm going to recognize him right now. Nico?
Yes, well, very brief indeed. I think we really have to improve the monitoring and supervisory mechanisms, because we are done basically with standard setting, and it would be fantastic to have an environmental charter, but we really have to improve supervisory mechanisms and enforcement, and that can sometimes be also through soft law mechanisms. See the enormous impact of the annual IPCC reports. And of course, along the avenue of liability of companies, we can reach a lot. See the enormous impact of the Urgenda judgment in the Netherlands, but also now 2 weeks ago, Citizens Against Royal Dutch Shell. We acknowledge that Shell is doing quite a lot in making the energy transition, but it is not enough. That is basically, in a summary, the judgment. So we have to work with multiple actors, including very much also the business enterprises.
Thank you very much. And I see actually that our time is out. I want to at least have a few minutes of a break here. And so I want to thank all of our participants today for really their terrific presentations and very brief summaries. I asked them to be brief and they all responded, and I really appreciate that. And so my appreciation to all of you. And with that, I would like to close this session, because having taught remotely now for 1.5 years, I'm acutely aware that everybody needs a few minutes break before they have another 1-hour session. So my thanks to all of you for this session.
Thank you.
Edith, thank you very much for this very impressive session. And yes, big applause for all the contributors. Can I suggest Bharat, so what should we do? 10-minute break? Would that be okay?
Maybe, maybe we can have a little break. Yeah, maybe 5 minutes.
5 minutes break? Okay. If we can be back in 5 minutes, and then we can start the next session. I'll see you all in 5 minutes.
I have to say I will not be able to participate in the next session, so I'm saying goodbye and thank you so much. It was very good seeing all of you.
Nele, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, Martin.
Yes, we're back. We're back. Just waiting to see if when Greg is back too.
So we need to, Martin, close it little before 1 hour, maybe.
Yes.
Maybe request Nick to leave about 5 minutes or 7 minutes, before we can just conclude that ceremony. Yeah.
Yep. That sounds good. Okay.
We can start now. Yeah.
Yeah, since we're almost all back. Nick, can I give you the floor?
Thank you very much, Martin. And I want to thank all of the first session speakers for really stimulating ideas. To encapsulate the paper into a small space is a real challenge, and we have that challenge with us now. Well, I'll proceed directly to our speakers in the order in which they were announced and invite them all to keep their messages short, because maybe if we're really disciplined, we'll have more time for interaction along the lines of what we didn't have in the first panel because it was so good. So Olof Fauchald at the University of Oslo in Norway, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will talk about peace building and sustainable environmental governance. But my main starting point is the question, are current characteristics of international environmental governance conducive to the building of sustainable peace? The reason why I focus on this particular topic is the double challenge that we're facing today with instability due to environmental degradation and a number of countries facing very significant challenges in terms of attaining stability and attaining a peace that is sustainable. So I'll ask this question first, and then I'll come back to the reforms I would suggest that are needed. So what is needed to build peace in post-conflict situations? There is this suggestion that the mutual benefits of cooperation will have to outgrow the self-interested rationale of the conflicts. So we will have to change the benefit cost analysis of those main actors in a conflictual situation. And how can international environmental governance contribute to strengthen the mutual benefits of cooperation in such situations? Well, I suggest that there is two main elements to this that are particularly important, and one is the ability to respond to highly variable local conditions, and the second is responsiveness to tensions between liberal and illiberal approaches to peace building, because there is no question in the current situation that we have a significant change going on in international politics, in international policy relations, which is raising the issue of what is could be referred to as an illiberal approach to peace building, and we must take on that situation. I identify in my contribution 4 key characteristics of international environmental governance. It's that it is ad hoc and subject specific. We have touched on this. It's incremental and facilitative. It has a low, but I would suggest increasing degree of reciprocity, and it has a high degree of being science-based. So those are 4 characteristics that I would suggest are key to the current system of international environmental governance. And I would argue that in relation to these 4 key characteristics, there will be 4 sort of reforms needed in order to enhance or increase the contribution of international environmental governance to a sustainable peace. The first is we need to increase the responsiveness to post-conflict situation. We have had initiatives in UNEP, UN Environment, to deal with peace issues, but mostly it's about preventing conflict, not about building peace, construct peace in the aftermath of conflicts. And this responsiveness includes a very important element of timeliness. And if we want to be able to build this this ability, might we need new institutions, or is it sufficient to reform the existing institutions? Is a key question. The second reform I would propose is openness to illiberal approaches to peace building. We must open up to these trends that we're seeing in policy, domestic. This is the state sovereignty issue coming up again. We must open our eyes to this and accept that this as a fact of the world. We must relate to it. And this opens up for the suggestions pointing in the direction of working with regional and local institutions and base this work on pragmatism. The third reform I would propose is we need less reciprocity and more solidarity. There is a declaration on solidarity moving through the system now. It's not received too much attention and too much support currently, but I think the issue of solidarity is an issue for the future. And this points in the direction of need for reforms of funding mechanisms. It points in the direction of NGOs, activating NGOs, and also foreign direct investment, the role of foreign direct investment in building or constructing peace. And then the fourth reform is the need for precautionary approaches in this context. This instability that we're seeing, it's called, I mean, the Anthropocene is pointing towards increased instability. It means that it's hard to predict. It's hard to know where we're going and how we're getting there. So we need a precautionary approach, and we cannot wait for scientific consensus. So the current emphasis on scientific consensus building is perhaps something that we need to think anew about. So thank you. Those are my comments.
Well, that's a very stimulating set of comments. It reminds me of the Sendai platform the UN has for cooperation in the context of disaster relief. Some of your same themes are working in that format. But now we turn to the presentation from Syed Mahmoudi from Stockholm. Syed, lovely to have you here from the University of Stockholm, and look forward to your paper.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. Actually, the title of my paper is an environment, a UN specialized agency for the environment. The question is that this title, of course, gives rise to the question of whether we at all need a specialized agency and what's wrong with what we already have. I have to go back to Stockholm and even the period before Stockholm Conference 50 years ago. Before doing that, I may add that as far as I can see, there are two areas of international law where the question of institutions or the governance generally are very important. And they are always there. International environmental law and international human rights. And of course, the question of monitoring, implementation, which are part of the question of governance. So that was also in the mind of those people who negotiated or prepared the meeting in Stockholm 1972. Before Stockholm Conference, let's say environmental issues or international environmental issues were addressed normally by the existing specialized agencies. Each one within its own mandate could deal with some questions. What one discussed at Stockholm just prior to Stockholm was 2-3 different options for the international environmental law. One option was that there should be an institution outside of UN system and consisting of only Western countries, those who were accused of being the only responsible for environmental problems at that time. Something like OECD, for example. This was unrealistic, and of course, it was never taken seriously either because of the nature of the problem. The second suggestion came from the Secretary General of the United Nations, and that was a typical specialized agency for the environment, a new such agency, like all the other specialized agencies. But even this one was rejected because states were generally reluctant to accept a new specialized agency. There was a relatively negative attitude towards these agencies at that time, to some extent, even later on. Their inefficiency, their much cost on these things. And the third option was to expand the mandate of existing specialized agency in order to cover even environment. But even this was rejected. So what happened was that the conference really couldn't decide specifically on any of these options. And what happened was that the General Assembly decided in December the same year to establish a program instead. That is what we have today, the United Nations Environment Program, a subsidiary organ with very, very limited, so to say, mandate and vague mandate and inadequate budget and structure. Since then, since 1972, there have been several efforts to assess the work of UNEP and to discuss the question of institutions and how one can do so that the environmental institutions really cope with the task as our knowledge about environmental problems are increasing and the type of environmental problems have changed. And moreover, more importantly, the attitude of states have changed completely compared with what it was for 50 years ago. I'm not going to go through all these stages of different efforts. I may only mention a couple of them. In fact, although at every important point of time, such as 1992, before Rio Conference, 2002, before Johannesburg Conference, and 2012, Rio plus 20, this question has been discussed. There have been proposals about how to do with institutions and what we can do about UNEP. Many of these discussions have led to nothing, practically nothing. It was only in 2012 that we have some changes, which I can return to. But let me, before mentioning these changes in 2012, also refer to the question that during or between 2002 and 2012, this was a very specific period of time for different reasons as regards international law as such. Perhaps because of 9/11, perhaps because of very vivid discussion with the United Nations almost every year. But the summit 2005 in General Assembly, they touched upon the question of environment without discussing the question of institution. Because of what was discussed there, the Secretary General, Kofi Annan, decided to establish a panel, a high-level panel, which had several functions, but one of its functions was environment, and to make an assessment of what we should do to revitalize the whole system. And this panel reported 2007. And in that report, it was probably the first time that in very strong terms, they recommended the revitalization of UNEP. It was not a question of, let's say, establishing a new organization, but revitalizing UNEP. At the same time, several NGOs and scholars, including our friend Bharat Desai, suggested actually 2006, 2007, they suggested that it was high time to have a global environmental organization and changing this program into something real big. But as I said, nothing really happened until 2012. What happened in Rio 2012 was, which was a summit, was that the states could at least address this question of institutions more concretely, and they decided that UNEP's governing council, which consisted of 35 countries, should be a universal, let's say, entity, getting in all countries, the possibility for all states to be member. And of course, it has its own effect. That was the decision, and the Environment Assembly was established. The result became that it had some effect on many states to make their own contributions, voluntary contributions, a little bit more, and decide to make UNEP a little bit more important, more powerful than what it was. In the last 5 years, 2017, the first, let's say, step after Rio, that was Summit on Global Pact. Again, they addressed this question. States acknowledged the need for revitalizing and empowering more UNEP, but no state really mentioned the question of a specialized agency or a new global environmental government. We heard when Nick was giving his presentation about the work within the UN system now, I can add that the General Assembly in the last 3 years, since 2019, they have adopted resolutions. They have discussed the issue of giving more power to UNEP. They have acknowledged the need for empowering UNEP, but this has just stayed at the same level as before. This is states seems, at least my conclusion is that states seem to be satisfied with UNEP as it is. It has done a great job given its limitations, great limitations that it has all the last 5 decades. I can finally mention that.
So we're running very short on time, Said.
Yes, I can only say that among all the states, I think European Union states have mentioned in several occasions the possibility of specialized agency for environment. But the United States, Russia, China, and many developing countries have refused that. They don't want it. Why I think personally that it would be a good idea to have a specialized agency or to turn UNEP to a specialized agency is the very fact that all those conditions that have, I must say, given rise to concern for states to have a specialized agency for this in this area, they have gone away, in my view. Today, we have a UNEP which has professionals knowing their job very well. If it turns into a specialized agency, it will not be suffering those normal problems and weaknesses that we know and we have witnessed in other specialized agencies. And independent legal status will certainly help it function much better than it has done so far. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was a wonderful overview of the evolution of international political debate on the issue of a more focused specialized agency. And and the work of the UN Environment Assembly is in fact the major innovation in these periods. But now we turn to another dimension. Owen McIntyre is at the University College Cork in Ireland. Owen, good to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick. My contribution is in the area of international water resources law. And I would suggest that what we need to do in this field is we need to keep moving along a spectrum, the spectrum that we might associate with the evolution of international law from a law of coexistence to a law of cooperation. So I would suggest that we continue to build on what we have, but I would advocate moving towards what I would consider a third generation of international water law. The starting point really is the looming freshwater crisis. I don't think anyone would argue that water demand is expanding exponentially, outstripping sustainably available water resources almost everywhere on the globe. And so we must ask, is international water law fit for purpose? Now, to start looking at the current situation, international water law has come a long way as a subfield in 55 odd years. It's really quite a short period since its first comprehensive codification by the International Law Association in the 1966 Helsinki Rules. We now have a global convention, the UN Watercourses Convention, which is widely regarded as reflecting and largely regarded as reflecting custom. We have a global set of rules on transboundary aquifers. We have, very importantly, the UNECE Water Convention, which of course has a secretariat and is working hard to develop these rules. We have a global consensus around three basic rules: equitable and reasonable utilization, the no harm principle, and the general duty to cooperate. It's a very dynamic field. The most dynamic subfield of international environmental or natural resources law. If we look at key cases in this field in the last 20, 25 years, Gabčíková and Ajimarosh, the Rhine chlorides arbitration, the pulp mills case, Kishinganga arbitration, the San Juan River cases, the ongoing Salala case. International water law has been dynamic, has contributed a lot to our understanding in this field. It's permeable, it is receptive to ideas from other fields. So if we think about the ecosystems values that have been received from established practice under CBD, under Ramsar, international water law has easily taken those on board. Similarly, human rights values from General Comment number 15, currently we see them set out in under SDG 6. It has also contributed to the development of international environmental law. A key example is the equitable sharing of benefits, a central element in CBD, but something that has always been core to international water law. However, there are key challenges here in that interaction. We have to ensure that there is a reconciliation, a convergence, more convergence between international water law, international investment law, particularly in the context of greater development of international water courses because of a looming water crisis, investment in hydropower, etc. Reconciliation with international trade law. There's greater awareness of the water embedded in products and global trade. And of course, global biodiversity values. We need to take these on board more. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I identified 4 developments or reforms. They're all interrelated. They could be characterized in any number of ways. The first is normative indeterminacy, or 4 problems perhaps. The first is normative indeterminacy. International water law developed on the basis of highly flexible principles like equitable and reasonable utilization, because basins are all different, states are all different. There are very different geophysical, very different social, very different environmental, ecological, economic, political factors. So I think we have to now move, and of course this created flexibility, which ensured participation, but it leaves us with a lack of clarity. So states can fail to agree on what the normative core of any arrangements actually are. And this idea of, for example, equitable and reasonable utilization based on an open-ended list of non-hierarchical relevant factors, we really have to move away from that more towards global values. The perfect example is biodiversity values, considering the global biodiversity crisis and the massive problems with the aquatic biome Also human rights values. These are global values. So we have to move more from a bilateral regime based on reciprocity to one more based on ergo omnes obligations and solidarity. The second challenge is that of benefit sharing. In the context of a looming water crisis, we have to achieve optimal and sustainable utilization. So the ecosystem approach, now reasonably well embedded in international water law, provides us with an opportunity for sophisticated benefit sharing arrangements, which would also maintain ecosystem function. But this will require intense procedural cooperation. That will require, in turn, enhanced institutional arrangements. Again, this is symptomatic of a move from coexistence to cooperation. We need more highly developed and more sophisticated institutional and procedural cooperation. The third related issue is that of adaptive management. Again, in the light of a looming water and biodiversity crisis. This idea of taking an iterative, flexible approach which responds to changing conditions, changing knowledge, sounds great, but it's a challenge for law generally. Law seeks to enhance stability. In international water law, legal arrangements provide the stability for development, for investment, for irrigation, for hydropower, for all of these other things. So flexibility is very, very difficult to achieve. For example, pulp mills gave us a universal obligation to conduct environmental impact assessment, having regard to transboundary elements. But EIA is a front-loaded process. It assumes we can anticipate problems before a project has been implemented. So we have to look at moving away from that. Now that will require, as well as procedural and institutional enhancement, it would also require deeper reconciliation with international investor protection. So this will be quite complicated. And the final one is broader stakeholder participation. And again, the inclusion of non-state actors, etc. And this has come up from various speakers. Despite Rio Principle 10, the international water law is still very, very, very much focused on interstate engagement. This is central, however, broader stakeholder participation is central to the ecosystems approach, adaptive management, benefit sharing, and human rights, and to optimal and sustainable use, as a key goal of international water law. Again, this will require greater procedural and institutional enhancement. So I would say, keep going as we're going, but much more quickly, with much greater ambition. And we have the frameworks in place globally and in many, many basins. What we need to do is to inform practice in order to highlight the benefits of greater and deeper cooperation and to identify feasible approaches towards doing so. Thank you, Nick.
Well, thank you very much, Owen. You've given us a good pathway and a good example of how, in the context of one sector, the broader themes can be advanced. Look forward to further discussion on these ideas. Our next speaker is Professor Greg Rose from the University of Wollongong in Australia. Good evening, it's late for you now. We're glad you're still alert and awake. On to you, Greg.
Thank you, Nick. Good evening from down under. It's just past midnight here, and it's a pleasure to be with you to celebrate Earth Day 2021. And I just want to thank Professor Bharat Desai for organizing the symposium, and Environmental Policy and Law, Martin and Stefan, for their efforts. Since Saturday night is normally a night when people go out and socialize, I'd like to talk to you about marriage. Not mine particularly, but marriage between international environmental law and transnational criminal law. And the essence of my proposal is that in the first quarter of the 21st century, it's time for international environmental and transnational criminal law to get to know each other better, and to suggest that we as lawyers can help them find the right partner and explore and find a marital union. Transnational criminal law is a better prospect than international criminal law. International criminal law would involve a great deal of struggle in circumstances of armed conflict with very meager environmental happiness, the product of that union. It deals with the extremes of crimes against humanity and genocide, and isn't well suited to the everyday criminal business of environmental breaches. So let's explore this notion of transnational criminal law concerning the environment. First of all, the question to pose is, what is an offence? Because most environmental laws concern compliance rather than criminal sanctions. And here we're talking about offences against national laws, not international laws. So there's a connection back to the talk that Nele gave earlier about implementation. And so I came up through this journey looking at rules of international environmental law through to implementation and particularly compliance regimes and interactions between regimes, and then ultimately to criminal law enforcement, because it was kind of a logical landing place when trying to find legal tools to implement international environmental law. So first is offences against national laws, not international. Next, the transnational elements that involve crossing borders, conveniently set out in the UN Convention on Transnational Organised Crime, and it sets out 4 cross-border factors as alternatives. If the crime is committed in more than one state, but prepared in another, involves a transnational crime group that's active in more than one state, or has substantial effects in a state other than the one where it was committed. So all of those are transnational elements. Those are the easy parts. The hard part is figuring out what's environmental in a transnational environmental crime, because countries have very dissimilar approaches to their national environmental compliance regimes and to the application of criminal offences in pursuit of environmental compliance. And mostly breaches of environmental standards are not considered serious crimes with major penal jail time sentences. And criminal intent across a chain of administrative control can be difficult to prove to a criminal level. And then going beyond those difficulties, we need at the international level to harmonise those environmental elements of transnational crimes to facilitate transnational law enforcement cooperation. So it's at this point that our skills as international environmental lawyers become relevant, because MEAs, multilateral environment agreements, do provide some common agreed definitions of environmental harms that the international community has accepted, although most of those are not agreed to be criminal. They're mostly agreed to be subject to enforcement at the discretion, according to the legal system of the sovereign state. So in the area of pollution prevention, we have the Basel Convention, which states that illegal traffic in hazardous waste or other waste is criminal. The Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer invites parties to report on cases of illegal trade. And concerning the Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions on certain hazardous chemicals and persistent organic pollutants, the secretariats of the MEAs were invited by their parties to examine synergies to address international illegal trafficking. So in those areas, there's precedent for harmonising our definitions of environmental harms as criminal. It's weaker in the area of biodiversity conservation. CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, requires parties to penalise trade that violates the convention, although it doesn't specify criminal penalties. And under the Biodiversity Convention, the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety and the Nagoya Protocol on genetic resources both refer to penalising illegal transboundary movements. So there's clearly a focus there on transboundary movements, illegal movements, which could be commonly harmonised as criminal. So there are many gaps then that remain. There's nothing that requires global standards legalising or criminalising illegal logging or illegal fishing, which are by value and volume the greatest of transnational environmental offences. And there's a complete gap in relation to environmental terrorism, which actually is a phenomenon that occurs with deliberate setting of forest fires and so on. So there are gaps that the MEAs don't address, but it would be too ambitious to attempt to form agreements to address these gaps without first building the foundations in environmental governance or crime prevention in each agreed sector. So instead, what I suggest is that the Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, which requires law enforcement cooperation in the suppression of serious crimes, could, in a protocol, define those matters as simply serious crimes, and that a protocol under the Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, Protocol on Transnational Environmental Crime, could harmonize further the definitions of crimes for pollution prevention that I mentioned in hazardous waste, ozone depleting substances and chemicals, and in biodiversity conservation concerning trade in endangered species or breaches of biosafety and genetic resources norms, so as to facilitate greater transnational law enforcement cooperation, which would occur at the national level through cooperation between sovereign states. And I would hope that we could all take a role as marriage brokers or matchmakers to help facilitate this union between international environmental law and transnational criminal law. I suggest it with the recognition that there is a lack of accountability in international judiciary, and that this system relies upon national judiciary rather than international, and that we always have to be self-reflective as lawyers and ensure that our will to power doesn't overwhelm the general good. But I do think that transnational environmental crime, a protocol under the Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, could set the foundations for greater international cooperation to suppress transnational environmental crimes.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. That was a very stimulating paper and provides a very pragmatic pathway toward at least building the building blocks of solidarity for making environmental law implemented in an aggressive or a more firm way. Of course, the pragmatism will require us to think about how to do it. Maybe step-by-step voluntary cooperation would build the consensus for your protocol. But at the other extreme, we have soon to receive a report from a panel coming up with the international crime of ecocide. So there may be more push in the other direction. And how do we balance these? So let's go to our next speaker. Professor Oliver Ruppel is at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Oliver, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity. And I would like to introduce the topic briefly, and that was soil protection and food security. Now, at first sight, this calls for introspection of international environmental law, respectively national environmental law and international human rights law. And of course, I did discuss those, but the gravity of my paper is actually in the context of climate governance and the rules on trade in agriculture. Now, in my paper, I attempted to bridge two conceptual gaps, perhaps. The conceptual apartheid between environment and economy, and the territorial apartheid between national and international. And in that, I refer to soil as an ecosystem in the uppermost layer on the ground, on which basically plants can grow. Talking about our earth matters, because within this layer lies the entire capacity of our earth to produce any life on earth, making soil one of the most important resources of the planet. And soil delivers a lot of valuable services in carbon sequestration, making it really crucial for fighting climate change. Despite this, the right to food in the context of soil protection does not display widely, neither in the international soil protection area, nor in the climate discussion, nor in international trade law. So a lot of things that Owen has actually referred to in the context of water, I have also made reference to in the context of soil. However, soil has been much more neglected than water. Yeah. So where in the context of soil, the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, the rules of the WTO are silent. The climate affects the soil and the soil influences the climate. In fact, small changes in the soil can have major effects on the atmosphere and on global warming. However, the term soil, as I mentioned, is rarely mentioned in international law agreements, while its central function has so far been enormously undervalued compared, like I said, to, for instance, water. Of course, we have the SDGs, UNCCD, the CBD, all that is relevant to soil. But what is perhaps not known to many is that soils are the world's second largest carbon sink after the oceans. And while the Paris Agreement fails to explicitly mention soil, soil does fall under the Paris Agreement in terms of Article 5.1 that actually obliges parties to take action to conserve and enhance as appropriate sinks and reservoirs for carbon, for greenhouse gases. So in that, I have investigated the uneven and disproportionate impact of climate change, for instance, on agricultural sectors across the globe, as international trade plays an important role in climate mitigation efforts, and thus also relevant to soil protection and food security. Now, when looking at the World Trade Organization and its rules, it is obvious that the WTO is not an environmental protection agency, yes. And the WTO rules in the context of trade in agriculture also fail to make reference to soil, but it is ultimately important in the context of climate mitigation efforts. And that I have tried to analyze in terms of what the WTO rules could do in the trade and agricultural discussion to enhance soil protection around the world, and also to bring this discussion into the climate mitigation debate under the UNFCCC and Paris agreements. So in short, I do suggest that WTO reform actually, and of course, this is international environmental law, but you know, the WTO is gaining momentum in the context of environmental protection. If you look at the discussion at the WTO in preparation of the ministerial conference later this year, environment is playing a more and more important role. And I actually suggest that members in future agree to bring the WTO in terms of new legal interpretation of existing WTO rules under the GATT, the Agreement on Agriculture, in the context of border tax adjustments, for instance. And that WTO reform should look into WTO law conflicts between trade and the climate regime. This is a pretty complex issue, but I think for soil protection, the challenge will be to bridge the gap where measures claiming to implement the Paris mitigation commitments collide with present trade rules and bringing the WTO fully into the 21st century. The fact is that climate protection goals can only be reached if, in addition to decarbonization of the global economy, more areas of land and soil are used to extract CO2 from the atmosphere. So with that, I conclude in saying that greater efforts are needed to combine economic and climate performance in determining soil as a natural capital and as a valuable asset that needs a price tag despite the fact that it is actually priceless. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Oliver. That was a wonderful exposition on where we should have gone after the Doha round in developing the interface between trade and environment. But clearly, soil has a bridge between the layer of soil and the layer of water that Owen talked about in the wetlands. And so we have vast sequestration of carbon in peat and a lot of work throughout the world on how to protect wetlands now. And maybe we can have those tentacles expand into the area of trade. The G7 communique that came out recently from the United Kingdom as the chair of the G7 lays out a net zero approach to all these issues, which should leave the door open for doing that through the WTO if the major trading countries in the G7 agree. So there's a lot of promise there. Our next speaker, of course, brings us back to 50 years from Stockholm because she is in Stockholm, and the whole beginning that we began with to try to develop a law for the environment really has been a remarkable accomplishment launched in Stockholm. Anna Sundström is the head of the Olof Palme Center. So I pass the floor over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much. And well, let me start by saying that I think that my contribution in a way is a bit different, as it's more a policy comment than a research paper, sort of exploring if and what part of Olof Palme's legacy could guide us for Stockholm Plus 50, and even more important, of course, also beyond. So the heading, looking ahead through Olof Palme's vision for the global environment, of course, sets out this agenda. I'm certain that solutions can be found, but it is absolutely necessary that concerted international action is undertaken. It is indeed very, very urgent. With those words, Olof Palme underlined the importance of a firm global response to address the growing environmental crisis in his speech at the Stockholm Conference in 1972. Almost 50 years later, it is painfully clear that the necessary changes have not taken place and that time is now even more limited to make the necessary far-reaching changes. Politics has neither delivered sufficiently visionary societal solutions nor the courage to implement them. And in bringing the legacy of Olof Palme to build a greener future, in this text I highlight two concepts that I think could serve as a point of departure. Firstly, just transition. To gain acceptance for the necessary transition to a fossil-free energy and a more sustainable world, we are dependent upon an integrated approach where we develop responses that address inequality at the same time as climate change. This is core in the International Trade Unions movement and its call for a just transition towards a fossil-free, socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable world. The necessary transformation of our economies is not only about phasing out polluting sectors, but also about new jobs, new industries, new skills, new investment, and the opportunity to create a more equal and resilient economy. International legal frameworks needs to be put in place to make sure that profit on the expense of nature is stopped. We've heard a few of the previous speakers, of course, also touched upon this. From the Olof Palme Center, we are also quite active when it comes to what is then called ecocide that you mentioned earlier. By an amendment to the Rome Statute, making large-scale and systematic destruction of nature an international crime alongside war crimes. Secondly, the other sort of concept that I touch upon in my text is common security. Basically, the world needs to commit to joint survival rather than a threat of mutual destruction. Conflict and social tension grows, of course, as the predicted impacts of climate change are becoming increasingly visible. Environment and climate-related risks including extreme weather, water scarcity, etc., are among the top risks that the world faces. And because of increased uncertainty, the total defense spending is on a rise. Nuclear arsenals are being modernized, and not since the Second World War have we seen such large military investments. Nuclear weapons pose a gigantic threat to all of humanity, and together with climate change, they are usually called the twin threat. A changing climate threatens the survival of mankind, and nuclear weapons can wipe out all life in an instant. In the midst of the Cold War, in 1982, the Independent Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues it was chaired by Olof Palme, launched the concept of common security. The basic idea of common security is not complex. Only cooperation can provide the security that humans crave, where military competition and nuclear deterrence have failed. Ultimately, nations and populations can only feel safe when their counterparts feel safe. The escalating global health, climate, and economic crisis have led to a further deterioration of the world order as we knew it, and recovery requires urgent and reinforced cooperation at the international level, and the effects of climate change cannot be met with bullets and military. So our shared problems demand new shared solutions, and we need a new, fair, and inclusive multilateralism to be able to cope with new shared challenges, building on the ambition to achieve common security through cooperation. So let me therefore just end by mentioning that on the 14th of June, the Olof Palme International Center, together with the International Peace Bureau and the International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC, will launch a project that we call the Common Security 2022. And we will, together with an advisory group of experts, explore the need for and challenges to common security in our time. And so I, of course, invite all of you to also take part in these sessions. We will have a few sessions over the year, and the idea is to launch a report in April 2022 that also, for us, feeds into the Stockholm conference in June the same year, sort of really addressing the need for a common security concept to also face the security challenges posed by climate change.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Anna, and congratulations on a very exciting year of work ahead. I think it can bring together many of the themes that this issue of environmental policy and law has elaborated. I recall, of course, the banality of our acceptance of the nuclear balance, the idea that mutually assured destruction, everyone having the bomb will be able to keep everyone from not using the bomb. But mutually assured destruction, the acronym is MAD. This is really a MAD policy, but we're somehow complacent. We're not energized as we were at the end of the Cold War to eliminate nuclear weapons. And I think your cautionary tale needs us to also ask, will we become similarly affected by a numbness toward the environmental crises as they grow around us? The loss of species is continuing, and yet we are numb to it. We don't act immediately as we do in the case someone dies in front of us, or with the COVID-19 crisis. We're accepting of gradual degradation. We need to somehow address that. So maybe we can open the panel to discuss that very theme. It really goes back to Ole's first paper. And what exactly can we do to awaken ourselves, awaken the body politic, the governments, to the fact that in 2022, there is a chance to reset the agenda. The states have not seized it yet. But if we're to have some kind of a solidarity, if we're had some kind of a move toward more implementation of environmental law, what are the steps we have to take? And Ole, let me turn to you since you began this debate.
A very challenging task you're putting to us. My feeling is that we've now postponed moving forward with the climate and the biodiversity regime, and this will happen later this year. And I think that would be a very, very important stepping stone, or both of those processes would be very, very important stepping stones for launching something that turns more on international environmental governance in 2022. So I think we will see a certain awakening of public opinion during this year, which might facilitate going forward. But what we can do as a academic community, I think, is being willing to spend time and efforts to promote these issues in our respective jurisdictions, to make both bureaucracies and politicians aware of what's going on.
So, Syed, maybe I can turn to you, because you've given us this wonderful overview of the slowness in which the states have been able to work through the multilateral system to create greater competence to deal with these problems. Will the kind of popular political change that Ole has indicated, or that Anna wants to generate in the next year, will states respond to that in their foreign ministries? And can we see that have an impact beyond what happens nationally?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, well, to answer your question briefly, let me mention that the year 2001, we had a non-governmental organization that you yourself certainly know about it, CED, with Alex Keys and Wolfgang Burhane. There was a project within that organization about access to justice. And we were going to make an assessment of how in Europe, within the European Union, it is possible for individuals, for non-governmental organizations to turn into judiciary and to put the acts of states into question and force states to comply with the laws and particularly international environmental rules. The result was very, very interesting to see the differences between, let's say at that time, I think there were about 18 states, showing the difference from one extreme that, like the Netherlands, that anybody could go to the court and the courts could make a decision against anybody and any company or any state organization, to Greece on the other extreme, absolutely no possibility. The development that we have witnessed the last 2-3 years, Nico referred to the cases decided in the Netherlands the last 2 weeks and the last 2 years. But we know that there have been cases in France, in United Kingdom, in other countries. I think it's very, very helpful, very hopeful. It shows that, first of all, states have started adjusting their national systems to this demand, popular demand, that individuals and non-governmental organizations should have the possibility to put in question and to put pressure on decision makers. And the courts have been also responsive, hopefully, and in my view, because of what we have taught our students today, judges sitting in different courts, they have understood that they should use the legal possibilities, the possibilities that the law gives them to decide. I am very hopeful that this will continue, and this will put more pressure on states to comply with their international obligations. Let me finish by mentioning that we will arrange an international conference next year at Stockholm University 15th to 17th of September. And it's a stock taking of all that has happened the last 50 years in the field of environmental law. So it's a global conference, and I hope to see you all there. More information will be distributed soon about this conference. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I think that conference is going to be well worth attending. I look forward to it. Let's pass the floor to Greg and see his response, because if we have courts willing to be, or prosecutors willing to begin using the courts for criminal prosecutions of national crimes that destroy soil or water quality, especially if it's transboundary, will that be a way to build the pressure on the foreign ministries to reflect the fact that there's consensus? I noticed there's a recent federal court decision on climate change in Australia. Is that a bellwether to whether the judges will be receptive to this kind of criminal or public pressure in Australia?
Thank you, Nick. I think that generally judges are conscious of the expectations of social justice in their judgments and are responsive to public sentiment within the bounds and the leeways, the interstices between legislation, prescriptions and precedents that allow them discretion. So within the common law system, there's a tradition of judges innovating within the bounds that they are allowed. And certainly, although Australian judges are, depending on the court, relatively conservative, they're also responsive and very conscious of public sentiment. So we have a federal system with state courts and federal courts. The federal court system has the federal court and then the high court above it. The federal court is known for its liberalism and its willingness to innovate within the bounds that the Australian Constitution allows. And so that's where we see most environmental innovations taking place. At the international level, with the notion of an amendment to the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute and the introduction of a universal crime of ecocide, I would express concern and consternation, because if we look at the International Criminal Court, it's already cost $1.5 billion over 20 years and has secured 4 convictions, running at $150 million a year in a relatively unsuccessful way. And its decisions are constantly criticized for their lack of judicial probity and their politicization. So I think ecocide runs a great risk of politicization and reflects an appetite for risk in the international environmental law community that could well see the international criminal justice system damaged.
Well, I should let Anna have the right to reply. Anna?
Well, maybe I don't think that maybe this is the seminar to debate ecocide, and also I'm not sort of this legal expert. It's of course was an idea that was also mentioned by Olof at the Stockholm conference in 1972. So it sort of originates from also this conference. And well, I think that, of course, the politicization of the ICC is of course, a problem in itself. And this is something that also, of course, needs to be addressed in various ways, and also to make sure that it becomes more efficient. But I don't think that because of the politicization of the ICC, it's sort of, well, the path is not to sort of abandon the idea of to have this international criminal court and to also develop its ways of working.
One of the great outcomes of the Stockholm conference was the environmental modification agreement, the whole concept with NMOD of trying to stop using the environment as a weapon of war, which was going on in Vietnam with the United States using weather modification and napalm for deforestation. So we saw a reaction against that, and laws were formed which may not have been universally accepted, but have deterred states from going down that path. We haven't seen states do the same thing again. So I think there is a normative benefit toward clarifying these extremes. But one of the interesting points in our new times is that, as Ole points out, we now have liberal and illiberal, or nationally oriented populist governments and authoritarian governments, which don't accept some of the same patterns of grassroots democracy, or are not influenced by public opinion in the same way as most states were in 1972. So I turn to Owen and Oliver to reflect on that. If we're going to take water policy or soil policy and law and come up with strong management systems, how are you going to do that with illiberal systems of governance at the national level, or liberal systems as we've had previously? Owen, over to you.
Thank you, Nick. To be quite honest, I don't see the difference really if I think about natural resources management, shared natural resources management, and international water resources in particular. I don't necessarily see the difference in dealing with a liberal or illiberal regime. In fact, as people were talking about popular pressure, I had reservations, and I would have expressed those reservations, because whereas political pressure, we can see that political pressure is important in influencing the actions of governments. And we see that in the climate. Every day we see mounting pressure in respect of climate. But when we're talking about shared natural resources, populism, to use the term very broadly, can actually be counterproductive. Think about fisheries. Think about shared natural resources where that popular pressure can actually lead to a rush towards use or towards capture of resources, and that can lead to unsustainable use. What I would say is that what we need to do in the area of international water management is less dramatic. I don't believe we need new instruments. I don't believe we need new approaches. I don't think that's going to contribute a great deal where we do have a full framework. I think what we need to build upon what we've got, to deepen the arrangements that we have, to normatively develop and elaborate those arrangements that we have. I do quite a lot of work in consulting work with state actors, and I'm always staggered at the lack of awareness among state actors, that for many key governmental actors, the mindset which is based on a traditional sovereign paradigm, the mindset could be still in the early 1970s quite often. There is an understanding that shared natural resources are a zero-sum game, whereas we need to highlight the benefits of meaningful cooperation, the mutual benefits of meaningful cooperation, the economic and other benefits of meaningful cooperation, and then to identify and to help to promote, feasible, practicable solutions and approaches to optimizing use, sustainably optimizing use. And I think that's an argument that any type of regime, liberal or illiberal, ought to be able to understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Oliver, can I call on you?
Thanks, Nick. I basically very much agree with what Owen said. I don't think it makes much of a difference. I think the key is cooperation, international cooperation. And I also think that there are certain natural elements or Earth systems in place that I think should be viewed in a more universal sense, maybe in light of the public trust doctrine applying to things in which humankind as a whole has a legitimate interest in their protection. And that, this is guided, and the industrial transition to climate neutrality should also be guided by this, maybe call it leitmotif. I spent quite some time in the IPCC looking into the concepts of human security, and I think that is something that should guide the process. And if you look at the fact that the World Food Programme received a Nobel Peace Prize in 2020 in the context of food security, which is one element of human security, it delivers a certain message. And in that sense, I think we have a lot of scientific information at hand, but the problem is the political elephant in the room. In that, I would like to refer to a statement by Olof Palme, which always inspired me, and that is, when we all play safe is when we create the utmost state of insecurity. And I think looking at the COVID situation, the distribution of vaccines, the inequalities around the world, then we actually know what he means. And we have to take our lesson from that. And again, the key element is global cooperation and not national interests by some that have different interests than others.
Well, thank you, Oliver. We have a question in the chat, which maybe is a good time for me to turn the chair over to Bharat and have both panels respond if they wish. The question is, after the COVID-19 pandemic, as we reopen our national economies, enterprises are going to hurry up to expand, which is going to mean more emissions, more consumption, more use of natural resources. Some project after the end of the 1918 pandemic, we had not just the end of the First World War, but we had the roaring 20s in the global economy, in which everyone went back to work and paid no attention to pollution. So what will be different now? And Bharat, I don't know if you want to take over the chair at this point. Our session has been very productive, but this part of going to the future is really a broad question that affects both panels.
Okay, yeah, okay. Thank you, Nick. Maybe I think it's a larger question, in the post-pandemic period, that where are we really heading for? There are those close connections, with respect to what the global environment has really suffered, and the kind of the human telltale human imprint, which has been now, of course, been certified and accepted by the anthropogenic, working group, that the it has been formally declared as anthropogenic, epoch, in year 2019. So I think probably COVID-19 pandemic, the way in which, it has proved to be so unmanageable. We still are groping in the dark. Plenty of issues which have come up about the inequity, and the great disparity, the loss of lives and livelihood have been created. So I would like to just throw this open, for contributors to both the sessions, all the panelists, and anyone who wishes to take up this. Although we have overshot our time, we thought we will keep it till I think almost 4:30 till that Amsterdam time, but we have overshot by 20 minutes, but maybe we can continue for next 10 minutes or so. So over to any of the panelists who wish to take up this issue.
I think one of the things that the pandemic has shown us is the differences in domestic governance systems, how that the importance of the differences in domestic governance systems. So by saying that, I mean, I must say that I disagree that this distinction between liberal or illiberal governance, domestic governance system, that doesn't matter. I think definitely it matters, and what we see in one lesson that we can learn from the pandemic is that, well, it doesn't really turns out that illiberal necessarily is worse than liberal in terms of resolving these sorts of issues or dealing with these sorts of issues. but the fact is that it matters, and that it's highly relevant also for the ways in which we deal with these problems that we're facing today.
And I think, yeah, maybe in the same vein, you know, probably the issue is much larger. I think maybe at the planetary level, you know, that issue probably we have not been able to cover, you know, in that, you know, that this is one of the very rare challenges in the recent past, especially in the post World War, Second World War period also, that it has affected almost every part of the world. Every nation state, you know, has been paralyzed, affected. Economies have been down, you know. A huge loss. We still don't know how many lives have been lost, you know, because all the governments have been very careful, you know, not to divulge much about it. Livelihoods have been destroyed, you know. And I think in this situation, you know, I think probably we still don't know the origin of this entire pandemic. That is another area where the WHO might at some stage maybe able to come up. We don't know yet whether that we will ever be able to know the truth of the origin of the pandemic, that from where did it come? Is it a nature designed virus or is it a human designed virus? That will lie in the womb of the future, you know. But I think since the issue is of a planetary level, planetary crisis which has been, I think, triggered, you know. So I think what I would say, maybe I would like to request, you know, Edith to come in at this stage, you know, maybe since she has spoken for a long time, you know, about the idea of planetary trust, you know. Several scholars have spoken about that issue, you know, that do we like, and since the planetary crisis at that level, you know, do we hold that planet, you know, I think, you know, as in trust, you know, what level of that planetary trust will come? Can we really push that idea? The other idea, of course, will be, you know, to bring to life what I have argued as a, you know, revival of the United Nations Trusteeship Council as a organ, as a supervisory organ within the UN system. But that is at a different level of subject. But I'd like to request, you know, Edith to join if you can spell out your idea of planetary trust.
Bharat, I believe Edith has left the meeting, so she won't be able to respond.
Okay. I think so. In that case, I think because I think this will require multiple institutions to really join this process. There are plenty of institutions which are still groping in the dark. There is a lot of politics also. Nation states are still like the way in which the WHO came under kind of, and knowing very well that the institutions, you know, there are, you know, they have the limits. You know, that institutions can be as powerful as the sovereign states want them to be. The full stop. That is exactly what the predicament of the United Nations itself is, you know. And I think so we have not yet touched upon that part of governance, etc., because of the paucity of time. But as we speak about the road to the future, probably that is the area in which we'll need to do little scoping. Yes, Nick, please.
Yes, I think that's a very important point you're making. And the study that Anna will be doing for the next year, or the conference that Saeed will have in September, needs to get into that, because we know the problems, as Anna said. We know what the deficiencies are. We have a good laundry list of all of them. They're pretty well accepted. What we don't have is the next step, the jump ahead to deal with those questions. And I think it's very important that those of us that deal with law look for what are the change agents in law. For instance, when we first established environmental law, we created the concept of environmental impact assessment. Look before you leap, do a study and mitigate the adverse effects. And that was accepted as Principle 17 in the Rio Declaration. It was in Article 206 of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It's now in virtually every nation's national jurisdiction, national laws, and the International Court of Justice has ruled that it's customary international law. And yet we don't use it. We do a very bad job on environmental impact assessment. We don't have public participation. The actors think they don't need it, and they try to suppress the use of environmental impact assessment in every country. And so here is a tool, a universal tool, ready at the national level to be, and being implemented actually, but not at a scale and at an efficiency that produces the promised results. So what's wrong with that picture? Why are we so passive about this and leaving it at the periphery of environmental decision-making instead of the center of environmental decision-making? I think if we don't answer that question in Stockholm or in Nairobi or both next year, we're just going to continue to compound our problem.
I think you're right, absolutely right. I think so. I think the future, our pathway will need to, I think there is a scholarly, task cut out, that the scholars shall have to come out with those concrete ideas. And this book, our Earth Matter is a lays down the groundwork, for that. That is exactly the kind of the journey, the prognosis, the prospects which we have tried to put together, and we did that reasonably well, and I think that provides, although it was not possible to cover all the ideas which are presented in the book, as I mentioned about the planetary trust or the issues of other dimension like the post 2020 biodiversity framework, the issue of natural environment in the armed conflicts, which Peter Maurer has presented from ICRC, because there are new guidelines which ICRC has come out with, so there are plenty of those excellent ideas which have been also covered in this book, and I think it's the right time that, well, I appeal to all the law schools, law faculty, students, to really look for this book, to ensure that the book reaches to your libraries and there is a wider dissemination, because we are really laying down that pathway for the future. This is really the groundwork which we have done, and we will hope
Bharat,
to.
Owen has a point.
You want to add?
Thank you, Professor Desai, and thank you, Nick, for your point. I think it's a very well-made point about EIA, but it goes beyond EIA. It's about the development of methodologies in law, and those methodologies being promoted through law, so that they have a legitimacy and that they may be employed at multiple scales, at national scales, at transnational scales in particular markets, and for particular products, at regional scales and at global scales. And I think, for example, to address the question we received from a participant about what do we do post-COVID, I know when we talk of climate, when we talk of the international or the looming water crisis, we're very often talking about a crisis of consumption. And I would suggest that methodologies, other methodologies, for example, life cycle analysis, are absolutely critical here. That we need to be able to identify and to help people to understand the true cost of what they consume, the true cost of what they do, how they travel, what they eat, what they wear, what they dispose of, what they buy every day. And I think law, that many of us look at these intersections between national law, international law, and then transnational law in between. And we see that a great deal is happening in the transnational space. Some of it may be greenwashing, but some of it is impactful, where it can reach the areas, to paraphrase a Heineken ad from many, many years ago, decades ago, I think, it reaches the parts that other beers just can't reach or just don't reach. Transnational law gets to those areas where law's reach is limited or weak or non-existent. And I think methodologies support that law can promote various types of methodologies to highlight, and that will, of course, allow environmental protection to be more effectively integrated into trade, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a suggestion going forward.
Okay, thank you, Owen. Yeah, thank you for this nice input. So I think with these words, I think we'll bring this session to a close. And as I mentioned, that this is a really we have laid down the groundwork for the future work ahead, as I said, and it was fabulous to work with all the distinguished colleagues, and they made it possible. And absolutely, to put together this work under a very extraordinary circumstances. And I really hope and pray that this work provide that Stockholm moment, to put it that way, for instance, just as a preparatory to the another 50 years of the Stockholm plus 50 to be organized in 2022. And we look forward to continue this process. As I already mentioned, that the environmental policy and law, which we will have a special section on road to Stockholm plus 50. And I will be reaching out to many of the scholars and practitioners to provide that contribution for this next year, and we hope and pray that we will be able to do something concretely, in person, maybe sometime in June 2022, as we move forward on this road ahead. And I personally thank, both the chairpersons, Professor Edith Brown Weiss and Professor Nicholas Robinson, for chairing this session fabulously, and all the panelists, all the contributions to the EPL, and of course to the book, who made this session possible. And now I'll request my esteemed colleague, Martin Stavanger, to formally pass a vote of thanks. Over to you, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bharat. I think you already said it very well. Thank you all for the great contributions that you all made. It was a very compact and very impressive session. So much knowledge in such short a period of time. Thank you all. Also to the participants, I hope you had a very stimulating and interesting session. We hope to see you all at a further next event or in the journal. And then I wish to say once again, thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the day. And by this, we will close this session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Be well.
Bye, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.